Hello, I'm Frank Doonan from Martin Food. I'm a member of the IFSA board. The Irish Food Service Suppliers Alliance represents over 200 member companies, and we are all suppliers to the food service industry on the island of Ireland. I'm pleased to chair today's panel discussion on the COVID-19 pandemic and the impact of the ongoing lockdown on the food service sector. The pandemic has deeply damaged our customers' businesses and presents a huge challenge to our member firms. We hope our discussion today will give our members some useful and timely information and guidance to help you cope with the challenges ahead. I welcome our panel of 5 contributors who represent diverse Irish business sectors. Together we aim to give members an insight into the current business environment and in particular the Irish food service sector. May I introduce our panel? We have Maureen Gahan. Maureen joins us from Board Bia, where she is Food Service Manager. Owen McFeely is Director of Consumer and Retail at PwC Ireland. From Bank of Ireland Food Service team, we have Roisin O'Shea, Head of Food and Drink, and Gerardo Larios Riso, Head of Hospitality. And we finally have Ian Dillon. Ian is a partner at Dillon Kelly Cregan, Accountants and Business Advisors. Welcome to you all and thanks for your participation. Questions have been submitted by our members over the past week, and I will pose these questions to each of you in turn. And I'd ask you to please share your insights with our member firms. We will aim to finish in approximately 30 minutes. If I may start with Maureen Gahan, Board Bia Food Service Manager. Maureen, may I ask you about the food service market? And in particular, can you share some observations with us how the various channels have been affected as this crisis unfolds?
Sure, Frank. Good morning, and thanks for having me on. Is my sound okay?
Excellent.
Okay, I'll crack on. So I suppose if we maybe take a step back to life pre-COVID-19, and if we look at the out-of-home or food service market in Ireland at the end of last year, so our research figures would estimate that at that stage, the market was valued at 8.5 billion at consumer menu prices. And it's a market that had been growing relatively strong, so in around 4 or 5% over the last number of years, very much mirroring an economy that was also in growth, consumers that were back at work, more money in people's pockets, more disposable income, and more consumer confidence. We had forecast that the market would continue to grow in around 4% this year, and anecdotal feedback that I've heard over the last number of weeks was that January, February and first half of March was on track to achieve that. And then I suppose on the 15th of March, things changed utterly, and the out-of-home market has suffered massively, not from a lack of consumer demand, but actually on the basis that we've been told to stay at home. So if you look at it by channel or sector, and I suppose maybe firstly at those that are not open currently for catering. As everyone will know, pubs are closed, schools and universities are closed, events and travel is closed. Hotels are barely open, but really from a food and beverage point of view, there's very little happening there. Convenience retail or food to go is effectively gone for the moment. What we are seeing is that some restaurants and a small number of cafes are open in both takeaway and home delivery capacity. And I'll talk more about those later. But other than that, there is very little activity taking place, except unfortunately in the healthcare, where we have feeding of patients and of healthcare workers. I suppose there's been a boost through programs such as the Feed the Heroes campaign. But sadly, that's really the only channel where we're seeing activity in line and above what was previously forecast. So again, based on anecdotal feedback at this stage, my guesstimate right now for that out-of-home market is that at maximum, we're operating at 10% of that 8.5 billion. And probably, in fact, the reality is it's lower than that.
Okay. And just in relation to restaurants in particular, Maureen, are there any interesting examples of businesses that have changed or been fleet of foot to introduce new methodologies?
Yeah, well, what we're seeing is that, as I said, the government did confirm that restaurants could continue to operate in takeaway or home delivery capacity. And I suppose in the first instance, a number of independents were able to transition over to this model. Obviously, the main concern for them is the health and safety of their workers and how do they implement social distancing within their kitchens. So operationally, that's a difficult challenge. But I mentioned independents. Many of them are family businesses. So again, social distancing less of a challenge. And I think what we've seen is the rhetoric, particularly in the last couple of weeks, has moved from I suppose, life post-COVID to living with COVID. So the reality is, and the recognition is that there's not going to be any short-term fix, unfortunately, for the pandemic that we're currently facing and living with. And so I think the restaurants are recognizing that if they want to continue to operate in some form of capacity and they want to continue some cash flow, then you're going to need to look at transitioning to this home delivery. And there has been growth. From a consumer point of view, I think as we continue with the lockdown, people are getting, pretty fed up on a day-to-day basis. So particularly at weekends, the opportunity for something different, they don't want to cook from scratch every day, and home delivery can afford that. And what you're seeing then is restaurants, in some cases, they're opening just say from Wednesday or Thursday through Saturday, maybe from 4 in the afternoon to 10 o'clock, maybe limited menu offerings. So everyone trying to figure out how this can work. And some restaurants have transitioned totally. So instead of delivering home cooked or delivering meals that are already cooked, they're actually delivering meal kits. We've seen this with some of the burger examples. So Bujo Burger in Dublin, Handsome in Galway, where they're actually delivering a box of raw burgers, buns, cheese slices, their special sauces, etc. And some other restaurants I've seen this with, like chicken wings and their special sauce. So it's all about trying to inject some fun. I think we could all do with a bit of fun right now. What we're seeing in the UK, and we're likely to see it in Ireland as well over the coming weeks, is that some of those bigger chains are trialing to see how they can reopen on a delivery basis. So what they're doing is they're very cautiously opening, maybe no more than 10 stores, where they're putting in place those plans from an operational point of view to see how this social distancing can work, limited menus, and then presumably taking on board those learnings and starting to roll out. And I think you'll see more of that as well. And some cafes to a certain extent, but a lot of it will depend. For now, it's about home delivery or takeaway. And until there's some restriction in terms of allowing people move further away from their homes, that's going to be limited to what we're seeing.
Okay. And just from a producer's point of view, have you seen any innovation coming in from a producer's perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So needless to say, the food and drink producers that we work with have also been hit hard. Now, many of them are seeing strong retail sales, but the reality is that those that were previously relying on hospitality, that business has been wiped out overnight, and they're having to look at innovative ways to transition. To be honest, most of that is coming from online and delivering direct to consumers. Just to give you an example, there's a company called Le Pâtissier, so they specialize in high quality handmade desserts. Robert Bullock is the name of the guy that runs it, and he would have mainly had business in hotels, events, weddings, etc. So overnight, 95% of his business was lost. He has since transitioned almost entirely to delivering direct to consumers within County Dublin. But what we've seen over the last 2 weeks, and unfortunately he did have to temporarily let go a number of his production staff, but he's continuing with members of his family. And what he now has is he's gone from 1 to 3 vans delivering 2 days a week, and planning to build that. And I suppose where Robert has been very successful is that he's using, in particular, social media channels to talk to his consumers and to build his brand. And a lot of this business that he's developing now will continue in life post-COVID as well. So we're seeing other examples of that throughout the industry. But evidently, in the same way for restaurants as well, this home delivery, it is an increase, but it's only a fraction of overall sales that are lost.
Very good.
Just
Thank
one
you, Maureen.
last thing
Yes.
on that, Frank, sorry, and I know we're under time pressure, but just to flag that all of our supports are available on the COVID Hub on the Board Bia website, and I'm sending out a weekly newsletter trying to keep track of what's happening here and in the UK. If you search for food service online, you'll see that. And separate to that, within the COVID Hub, there's market information, there's podcasts, there's webinars. So I would encourage any of the IFSA members to have a look and see what is available in terms of insights and information support.
Okay, thank you very much, Maureen. Now I can come to Owen McFeely. Owen, you're a director at PwC Ireland. Can I ask you to share an economic perspective on where we're at and some questions that have come forward from our members? What are you seeing from other countries in terms of government support to businesses under stress, and how does that compare to here in Ireland?
Okay. Well, good morning, Frank, and thanks for having me on. Yeah, an interesting question. I suppose if we just sort of stand back, if you go back to sort of late February, March, we started to see a number of countries across Europe and globally starting to take action and to plan how they would support the economy. I think the interesting thing to looking back is I think at that stage everyone was planning for a V-shaped recovery, and certainly I think the hopes of a V-shaped recovery are probably long over now. So I'd imagine what we'll start to see is those countries and ourselves that have put initial plans in place. I imagine we'll have to go back to the drawing board now and start to put a whole new series of plans in place. But I'll come on to that. In terms of other countries we have seen, I suppose that there's some common themes in terms of what countries have done. Generally, most countries at this stage have put income protection measures in. They put some sort of tax solutions in terms of corporation tax delays, income tax, etc., VAT payments, including ourselves. We're seeing a number of markets, really the majority putting in place government-backed loans, and we're seeing some government-backed grants as well. So kind of sort of four main common themes that we are seeing across across Europe and the globe. Some interesting ones, if I just sort of think about hospitality and tourism, and we've seen some, as I said, so at the macro level quite common, but some micro things going on. So Belgium have taken a look at kind of at reduced rates purely for tourism and hospitality. Germany has done some work in terms of where they're working with small businesses with less than 10 employees, which again, a number of hospitality players would fall into that. And they're basically putting immediate cash assistance programs into place. Norway has put in place state-backed loans up to 90% for SMEs. Portugal has done extended credit lines for the hospitality sector. And the UK, interestingly, if your rates bill is between 15 and 50,000, they're basically putting, the local councils can basically give you a 25,000 grant towards that. So that would kind of target those small, medium-sized players, which obviously are a lot of the food service operators. In Ireland, we've seen a number of things, and it's interesting. Like obviously, the COVID loans have come out through SBCI, etc. The micro enterprise loans have come out, and we have seen some uptake on that. I think SBCI is up to around 6.5 million now. The COVID-19, so the micro enterprises are up to 2.7. Business continuity vouchers are up around 2 million euros. So we are seeing businesses starting to uptake of that. And I would advise your members to obviously to look at all options available to them. But if we just sort of stand back, so as I said, countries have come out, including ourselves, with a series of plans. But I think yesterday's economic numbers are a game changer. So we're seeing the economy is going to decline by 10% this year. Only going to come back by 6% next year, and I think it's going to be 2022 before we actually get back to a number. Similar COVID, unemployment's going to hit 22. I think it's going to come down to around, I think it's around 10 or 12 next year. But ultimately, it's going to take us 2 years to recover from that, and that is the current situation. We don't know in terms of if that's going to worsen. So I'd imagine we're going to see another package come at us. But I think it's important. I think the sector here, tourism, hospitality and leisure, I think we need to come together strategically now and say, right, and ultimately do an economic impact, a broad economic impact assessment on the sector. So start to look at what are the drivers of spend and jobs within the sector. So we think about inbound tourism. We need to understand at an island of Ireland level. So what's the thing of UK, US, Europe? What's going to happen to those travellers coming in? What's the knock-on effect of them? So think of the Ring of Kerry, the Wide Atlantic Way. What's the impact on those areas? Then you also look at local tourism. You think about sports. So it sounds like GAA is ground to a halt this year. Concerts have ground to a halt this year. Start to understand at a macro level how are all of these going to play through into the sectors, into bars, pubs, restaurants, guest houses, and then you need to figure out, right, what's the level of support we need into these sectors. I think if you're to jump into just trying to sort of throw money at a solution, first of all, you mightn't come up with the correct solution. But I think now we've a bit of time. I think we need to stand back, get the key industry bodies involved, do a proper economic impact assessment, and then work out what the best solutions for those are.
Thank you. And just in relation to timing that with getting the hospitality industry opened up again, the challenge around that, and what are the things that the hospitality industry should be doing to prepare for that?
Okay, well, I suppose two key words we all probably wake up during the middle of the night screaming about at the moment: social distancing. And I think social distancing is here to stay. It's not going to go away, and we're starting to hear this much more from politicians over the last 24, 48 hours. The grocers are starting to tackle it. Shopping in a grocery store is okay. It's taking me 15, 20 minutes to get in, but it's getting easier. Obviously, those environments are built for it as well. They're much larger. It happens to be somewhat easier for them to implement. I think the challenge with tourism and hospitality is much tighter spaces. You think of your kitchens, your serving areas, your storerooms. So I think what your members should consider is put them near yourselves. And I should say as well, consumers, I think we're just going to become obsessed about safety. And this, I'm using the words of paranoia and caution. I'm going to be paranoid about my safety, and I'm going to be cautious about my spending. But we just start to put ourselves now into consumers, in our customers, and in the consumer shoes. I think this is where, whilst revenues are going to be challenged, I think your members perhaps have an opportunity to engage with their members in a proactive way to help them redesign their businesses. So I was reading there at the weekend, Larry Murren is starting to talk about how he serves quick service restaurants, and talk about McDonald's, and essentially saying they're working in a cockpit in terms of the size they have to work in. So how can your members start to think about how can they help quick service restaurants, pubs, whatever it is, redesign their engines, which I suppose ultimately is their kitchen. But also from a front of house point of view, if you start to think, and I read about Dalata now, I believe, if you're staying in the Dalata hotel, it's your breakfast is brought up to your room in a bag, and the bag has to be disposed of. So how can we start to think about how do you redesign the processes? So your members are selling food, so they're selling tabletops. So if I go into a restaurant, am I going to want to hold a menu in future? I'm not sure if I am, or I just want somebody to come on a blackboard and hold it for me. Equipment, cleaning, training. How are rooms going to be cleaned? When I check into a hotel room now, how's it going to be different? So I think there's a bit about reimagining the processes, because ultimately customers are going to come back. I think this year it'll be fueled much more by the Irish consumer. So I need to figure out, if I'm checking into a hotel, you normally have quite a good experience at the reception desk. Well, how is that going to be different now? Are there going to be kind of cough rails in front of me? How does that change that personal interaction? So I say, rather than assume it's going to be the same, I'd say to your members, stand back and look at the process end to end, cradle to grave, and kind of say, right, how does it work now? And where is there an opportunity for my brand and my product to come in? Menus is a very simple one. Salt and pepper canisters. Probably don't want to touch a salt and pepper canister at a restaurant. So what's the solution to that? And just stand back and give it some thought and engage with your customers. And I think they'd appreciate a call to say, right, I know you're going to open in 12, 16 weeks time. Let's start to think about how that might look.
Okay, thank you, Owen. I'd just like to come to Roisin O'Shea, Head of Food and Drink with Bank of Ireland Food Service. Roisin, how are you finding the sentiment in the food service sector in terms of business outlook among operators?
I guess really at the moment, there's no one thriving. It's a case of surviving. And where businesses are really is a continuum as to how much retail they had in their portfolio, and where they have any retail at all, they've really been putting focus on that. As Maureen alluded earlier, the food service side of the business is pretty much gone. There are some institutional contracts, but even contracts to hospitals have fallen back significantly as there's a decrease in outpatient attendance. What I would say is that we have seen some moves with some operators to kind of push on their retail business. So we see that the discounters are accepting some new listings now, and some products have been repurposed into retail. Obviously, that takes a little bit of time. In the UK, some of the larger multiples are selling catering packs, so people have been trying to get some stock out to customers through there. And again, I think the other thing that we're seeing is people really focusing on this direct web ordering. And I think what is a little bit different is the way people are coming together, and it's not just offering their own service, but they're collaborating with other producers. So for example, if you look at Hussey's Fruit and Veg, they're sending out St. Tola Goat's cheese, they're sending out Velvet Cloud, Inch House Black Pudding. So I think those types of cooperations are really interesting, and I think should be something that a lot of people look to do going forward. And I think social media is a really good way of building those connections, but so is LinkedIn, so is using your own network, and I think as well as things like IFSA. So I think it's a really good time to reach out and make connections now, because you'll find out what's going on a little bit quicker. You will maybe take advantage of some initiatives that are going out there, and you really are telling your story at a time when there's huge public support behind you, if you're trying to keep operating at all. So
if I can just maybe move to what is your message to companies that have cash reserves for the short term and are slow to borrow? Do you look at companies with reserves differently? When you can take that one?
Well, having cash reserves is a great place to be for those who are actually lucky enough to have them. Particularly the cash reserves are generated from cash surplus from operations, because it gives a really good indication of the business being able to generate surplus cash from trading operations. But if the cash reserves or the lack of there is not necessarily going to be a problem. It is just going to be important to understand the level of cash the business actually was generating before, and how the cash is being utilized, whether it's actually being utilized for investment, whether it was utilized for expansion. Because a lot of times the businesses would have been using that cash for investment in their premises, or for the acquisition of fixed assets that obviously wouldn't have reflected in the P&L. And in that sense, it would make sense then to replenish that those cash reserves with debt from a financial institution, because as we know, debt can be cheaper than equity, and it also allows the owners to actually retain the control of the business with no diminution of ownership or equity. In most cases, we would expect the customer to make a contribution of cash, and that's actually where probably most customers would actually view the requirement, or ascertain a requirement for us to actually ask for cash. But we would generally evaluate how the cash actually was used in the past, if there's actually no cash available when they ask for those facilities. And if it was actually the case that cash was just invested in the company, then we could be in a position to fund the entirety of a project. Support for 100% of the facilities can also be secured if, for example, somebody wants to do an equity release where there has been previous investment in that company, and this is actually just a way of them acknowledging their money has already been injected and they're taking it out. So it isn't necessarily a problem. It's just again understanding how that cash was used in the past, because cash cycles do change in companies.
Okay, and just with regard to managing debtors, debtors is a major concern for all IFSA members at present. How do you view a food service supplier, for instance, who has a large debtors book when applying for a loan?
Well, the cash management at the moment is a widespread problem at present, because everybody's actually trying to preserve cash, and in doing so, they've been contacting their suppliers and all of their stakeholders, trying to just keep a little bit of cash for themselves. As they say at the moment, cash is not really king; cash is actually emperor. So it is. We will first have a look at the debtors and the debtors age report, and try to understand the spread and the age of the debtors. Ideally, you shouldn't really have anything over 90 days. And if it is, there has to be a really good explanation. Ideally, there should be some kind of provision already in place. But we just really want to understand why did you get to that stage. Then we would look at the possible concentration on a single entity, or just in a small couple of entities, or a particular sector. For example, if one of the suppliers is full entirety of debt owned by the pub sector, there'll be obviously a slight issue there, because at the moment they're not trading. There is a potential that they won't be trading until much later in the year, and that would obviously limit the ability to collect that debt for a number of months. But again, that wouldn't necessarily be a problem. We'd just actually be analyzing at those cash flows, because what we tend to do is we look at a full year. We're never going to be looking at a picture of just exactly how the cash flows would have been, or the debtors would be at a particular point in time. We would try to ascertain at the cash flow cycle within a business. So we would be looking at the last year and see how those debtors were actually managed. And if we see that they were actually managed accordingly, with not more than 90 days throughout the year before, you can make the case that this is actually just an exception. It's an exceptional circumstance which everybody's in the same boat. And then you can just structure the loans or look at the facilities based on an exceptional circumstance. I mean, obviously, this is not the same case if you can see where you're doing the analysis that the over 120 days debtors have been a constant throughout the year. You're trying to look if this is kind of like just the odd one out. But if the cash is likely to be recovered, which is likely to be the case in most instances, there's actually, this again, it's just an exception rather than the rule.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much for those valuable insights. And can I finally welcome Ian Dillon. Ian is partner at Dillon Kelly Cregan, Accountants and Business Advisors. Ian, can we focus on the accounting revenue tax questions area? The wage subsidy scheme has been widely welcomed in recent weeks. However, some pitfalls and intricacies with the scheme have come to light. Have you any pointers to our members implementing this scheme?
Good morning, Frank, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this presentation. Yes, the COVID wage scheme was introduced. We're in phase 1 at the moment of it, and that runs up until the phase 2 comes in on the 4th of May. And while it has been very welcomed, as you say, and it is very well intentioned, there have been a number of pitfalls. First of all, there is the qualifying conditions for the employer, where they must have suffered a 25% decline in either turnover or customer orders in the relevant period, which runs from the 14th of March to the 30th of June. However, I would expect a lot of people within the food sector have suffered that. However, it is advisable to keep your notes, projections on the basis on which you determined you had a 25% decline. You must also self-declare on the Revenue's website that you were unable to pay your wages and so on and so forth. However, that, contrary to some initial thoughts, is not a declaration of solvency. Pitfall areas arise in relation to cash reserves, and a lot of employers where they had cash reserves wondered whether they qualify for the scheme or not. However, Revenue have said that they will qualify even if they have cash reserves, as long as they are not clearly excessive. However, if cash reserves are there, they would expect the employers to contribute to the top-up scheme that is in place. Other pitfalls are that the employees' average net weekly pay, on which the subsidy is based, is based on the pay for the January-February 2020 period. Now, Revenue have determined that where people are on monthly pay, that there are 9 weeks, and therefore their 2 monthly pay must be divided by 9 and not 8. Also, people who didn't have payroll, who didn't have pay during January, February, unfortunately, are just outside the scheme, and that is bad luck. Some employers have found themselves not being able to avail of the scheme, whereby they made their returns for January, February late and missed the deadlines. Unfortunately, that's unfortunate, and it looks like there's a lot can be done in that particular case. While the subsidy is not taxable through the employer's payroll, Revenue have said that it will ultimately be taxable in the hands of the employees at some future date. What that date is unknown at this point, and how the Revenue will actually operate that again is unknown. Phase 2 comes in now on the 4th of May. Unlike phase 1, where Revenue have issued 7 different guides, the latest was yesterday morning, they have yet to issue any guide for phase 2, so I can't really give any guidance on that, other than to say that the subsidy will go to 85% for the lower pay. But there may be some adjustments required for the people who are on whose average net pay was above $586 a week. They just need to be careful on that, but again, we're awaiting more details.
Thank you, Ian. And just what effect is the current trading situation likely to have on businesses looking ahead to end-of-year audits and tax return periods?
Well, I think it's generally accepted that the personal tax filing deadline, which normally falls on 31st of October of a year, with usually a 2-week online filing extension, is probably more than likely going to be deferred to as at the moment an unknown date. All other returns, corporation tax returns, VAT returns, PAYE returns, should be submitted as normal. However, Revenue have suspended enforcement procedures in relation to payments. And I think in general, people certainly have been paying their VAT, but they should be mindful that Revenue will come looking for that at some stage. But for the moment, I think the general is people aren't paying their VAT returns. PAYE returns have fallen dramatically for those who are availing of the subsidy scheme. In relation to sort of year-end accounts and audits, there are quite a number of difficulties there. Most obvious one is going to be a stop take. Almost impossible for the auditor to attend the stop take. We're looking at guidance from the institutes over such things as can it be done by video or can there be any other procedures. Similarly, with on-site audit testing of transactions, that's very difficult when you can't actually get the documents. And then moving on to the financial statements themselves, there are going to have to be a number of disclosures that are going to have to be contained within the director's report, outlining the effects that the COVID-19 has had on the business or is likely to have on the business going forward, and general disclosures in the accounts as well. And they're generally broken up for businesses that have closed completely at the moment, and then businesses that where they're not actually closed, but it has had a significant effect. And generally speaking, when you're looking at issues in financial statements, you would always have to look at a period forward for 12 months from the date the accounts are actually signed. And then finally, on the account side of things, going concern considerations are going to be something that's going to be difficult for both directors and auditors to take it, to determine, because obviously we don't know how long the situation is going to last, and so on, and is there going to be a second phase, and so on and so on.
Okay, and just lastly, Ian, maybe making staff redundant seems to be a last resort now. Is this pressure unfair on employers?
I don't necessarily think so. The subsidy scheme is there to keep the link between the employers and the employees. It's also there to keep the pressure off the social welfare system. It's effectively transferred some of the social welfare system on to the employer through the revenue system. Revenue it's not obligatory or mandatory to top up the subsidy payment, but revenue have said where as I said earlier, where companies have reserves, they would expect the employer to do the top ups. Now the top ups, there is a maximum on the top ups, and if you go over the maximum, there's a clawback. Also, I suppose the difference between the COVID situation, the recession, is that COVID has hit everybody at the same time, and it just came in immediately. Where the recession, I suppose, if we look back, well, it affected everybody. It affected people in different ways and at different times. So that's that's what I would say in relation to the scheme. And I personally think it's a very good scheme. It's also going to change slightly for the lower page. The subsidy is actually going to go up from 70% to 85%.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ian. That completes our discussion for today. I would like to thank our participants for their invaluable insights at this challenging time. As always, members will find a whole host of valuable information at the IFSA website, and our contributors are welcome to refer on links to the IFSA website team, and we will host that information on the site. I would like to particularly thank IFSA IFSA members who have participated in our recent COVID-19 Business Impact Survey. You will find a report of the findings on ifsa.eu.com. I would encourage our members to reach out to our executive and to each other to help navigate the next weeks and months. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.